They tell you that aging is a slow fade, a gentle sunset. They lied. Aging is a series of sudden doors locking behind you. Doors you didn't even know were open until you heard the click. I spent my 60s waiting for a sign that I needed to change, but the body doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it just whispers until it's too late to answer. Right now, you are making choices that will dictate whether your 80s are spent in a mountain cabin or a linoleum-floored ward. In the next 25 minutes, I am going to expose the silent thieves of senior health. If you are over 60, this isn't just a video, it's your final audit. Standing here at 80, the view is different than I ever imagined it would be at 60. When you are in that middle ground of your young senior years, you feel a sense of stasis. You think that as long as you don't get a big diagnosis, cancer, heart disease, stroke, you are winning the game. But the hard truth I learned is that the game isn't won by avoiding the big hits. It's won by managing the microscopic ones. I spent my early retirement years admiring the view, thinking I had finally reached the summit. I thought the hard work was over. What I didn't realize was that the descent is actually where most people lose their footing. The silent thief isn't a heart attack. It's the gradual, unnoticed erosion of the person you used to be. Every day you choose easy over active. You are making a withdrawal from a bank account that no longer accepts deposits. I want to talk to you about the architecture of your final decades. Time is a strange currency. When you're young, you spend it like a billionaire, throwing hours away on things that don't matter because the supply seems infinite. But at 80, you realize you were actually playing with a fixed budget. I look at this watch and I don't see minutes. I see opportunities. The biggest regret I hear from my peers isn't that they didn't work more or save more. It's that they didn't move more when movement was still a choice. There is a window of time, usually between 60 and 72, where you have the agency to hardcode your mobility for the next 20 years. If you miss that window, the cracks in the glass become permanent. I remember thinking I'd start a walking routine next spring. Well, 10 springs went by, and by the time I started, the joints had already begun to fuse into a new, more restricted reality. Let's talk about your internal scaffolding. Your bones and spine are the silent heroes of your independence. In my 60s, I ignored my posture and my bone density because, frankly, I couldn't feel my bones. We are trained to react to pain, but bone loss is painless until it's catastrophic. I saw a scan of my spine recently, and it looked like an old bridge that hadn't been retrofitted for a century. Tiny microfractures, things I never felt, had settled into a permanent slouch. This isn't just about height. It's about the space your internal organs have to function. When your scaffolding collapses, your lungs can't expand, your digestion slows, and your heart has to work twice as hard. But there is a way to recalcify your life. Even now, if you understand the weight-bearing secret most seniors ignore. There is a specific kind of silence that haunts a house when you realize you've lost your functional freedom. I call it the storm of the chair. In our culture, we celebrate the rocking chair as the symbol of a life well lived. But in reality, that chair is often a cage. I watched my own father sit down at 70 and essentially never get back up with the same vigor. He was resting, but his metabolism was dying. The storm brewing in the distance isn't old age itself. It's the metabolic collapse that happens when we stop challenging our equilibrium. I remember the first time I felt unsteady on my own porch. It was a terrifying realization that the world I used to navigate with ease was becoming a series of obstacles. You don't want to wait for the storm to hit before you start reinforcing your house. Nature has a way of showing us our future if we are willing to look. A leaf doesn't just fall. It loses its connection to the source of its vitality over weeks. For humans, that source is the mitochondrial health within our cells. At 80, I can tell you that feeling old is actually just feeling inflamed. I spent years eating inflammatory foods, processed sugars, seed oils, and too much refined flour, thinking I could handle it because my weight was fine. But inside, I was browning at the edges. Systematic inflammation is the rust of the human body. It attacks your joints, your brain, and your heart. If I could go back to my 60-year-old self, the first thing I would do is empty the pantry of everything that causes a glucose spike, because those spikes are the sparks that start the fire. Walking down a grocery aisle shouldn't feel like navigating a minefield, but for many seniors, it is. We are marketed senior foods that are nothing more than sugar-laden shakes and processed mush. I used to think that as long as I was full, I was nourished. That is a deadly misconception. Your body at 70 needs more protein than it did at 30 to maintain the same muscle mass, yet most of us eat less. Nutrition is the only medicine you take 3 times a day. I see people my age buying low-fat everything, not realizing they're starving their brains of the healthy fats needed to prevent cognitive decline. Your brain is 60% fat. When you starve it, the fog sets in. I spent 5 years in a brain fog I thought was just aging, only to realize it was actually malnutrition. I went up into my attic last month and found my old running shoes from the 90s. They were caked in dust, but they represented a version of me that I had discarded. I realized that I hadn't outgrown those shoes. I had just stopped being the person who deserved to wear them. This is the psychological trap of aging. We begin to identify as fragile. We stop doing things because we are old, and then we get older because we stop doing them. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The most dangerous thing you can do in your 60s is start acting your age. You should be acting the age you want to be in 20 years. If you want to be a mobile 80-year-old, you have to be an aggressive 60-year-old. You have to fight for your capacity every single day. Let's look at the brain, the commander-in-chief. We fear Alzheimer's more than almost anything else, yet we ignore the neural pruning that happens when we stop learning new, difficult skills. I used to do crosswords and think I was exercising my brain. Crosswords are just retrieval. To save your brain, you need acquisition. You need to learn a new language, a new instrument, or a new complex movement. I started learning woodworking at 74, and the mental strain was actually physically exhausting. But that's the point. If it isn't hard, it isn't growing. The gray mist you see in medical charts, the loss of white matter, can be slowed significantly by high-intensity cognitive load. Your brain is a use-it-or-lose-it organ, and most seniors are letting it go to sleep decades too early. I want to talk about the sinking sofa. There is a biological phenomenon called sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle. It starts in your 40s, but it accelerates like a freight train after 60. I thought muscle was for bodybuilders and vanity. I was wrong. Muscle is a metabolic sink. It processes your blood sugar, it protects your joints, and it is the primary predictor of how long you will live. Muscle is the organ of longevity. When you sit on that sofa for hours, your muscles are literally being reabsorbed by your body. It's a process of auto-cannibalism. By the time I was 75, I had lost 30% of the muscle mass I had at 60. I felt heavy, but it wasn't fat. It was the lack of engine to move my frame. But here is the miracle. Muscle is the one tissue that can be rebuilt at any age. Your life is a garden, and in your 60s, the gray fog of routine begins to settle in. You do the same things, see the same people, and eat the same meals. This lack of environmental novelty is a signal to your body that you are done. Your biology is highly efficient. If it senses you are no longer exploring, it begins to shut down the systems required for exploration. I call this the comfort trap. We spend our whole lives working so we can finally be comfortable, not realizing that comfort is a biological signal for decay. To stay young, you must remain uncomfortable. You must seek out cold, heat, hunger, and physical exertion. You must keep the garden of your life wild and unpredictable. When you stop struggling, you stop living. Balance is the first thing to go, and the last thing we notice. I remember trying to stand on one leg at a physical therapy appointment, and I lasted exactly 2 seconds. I was shocked. I thought I was fine. But balance is a complex dialogue between your inner ear, your eyes, and the nerves in your feet. If you wear thick-soled, supportive shoes all day, you are essentially blinding the nerves in your feet. I started walking barefoot on grass and practicing single-leg stands while brushing my teeth. It felt ridiculous at first, but it saved me from the great fall that breaks the hips of so many my age. A fall is often the beginning of the end, but balance is a skill you can reclaim. You have to train your body to know where it is in space, or it will eventually find itself on the floor. Nutrition isn't just about what you eat, it's about what you absorb. As we age, our stomach acid decreases, making it harder to break down protein and absorb vitamin B12 and magnesium. I was eating well, but I was still deficient. I had to learn the hard way that gut health is the gateway to senior health. If your shelves are empty because your digestion is broken, no amount of supplements will save you. I started incorporating fermented foods and high-quality enzymes, and suddenly, my energy returned. I realized I wasn't getting old. I was just failing to fuel. You need to treat your digestive tract like a high-performance engine that requires specific, high-grade additives as it gets more miles on it. Looking at a photo of your younger self shouldn't be an act of mourning. It should be an act of reconnaissance. What did that person have that you lack now? It's usually spontaneity. A young person can decide to run for a bus or jump over a puddle without a second thought. An older person has to calculate every movement. I spent years calculating. Can I make it up those stairs? Will my knee hold out? That calculation is the death of joy. To get back to that young man in the photo, I had to stop calculating and start training. I had to move from a defensive posture to an offensive one. You don't want to just survive your 80s, you want to attack them. Bone density is the invisible shield of the senior years. I want you to imagine your bones not as dry rocks, but as living, breathing honeycombs. Every time you lift something heavy, you send a stress signal to those honeycombs to thicken. Most seniors are told to take it easy, which is the worst possible advice for bone health. Strength is the only insurance policy that pays out in vitality. I started lifting small weights at 72, and my bone density actually increased for the first time in a decade. My doctor was floored. He told me I had the skeleton of a 60-year-old. That shield is what protects you from the fractures that turn a trip into a tragedy. You are never too old to build a stronger frame. Social isolation is a biological toxin. We are social animals, and when we retreat into our homes, our cortisol levels spike. I spent a year being a hermit after my wife passed, and my health plummeted. I felt more aged in that 1 year than in the previous 10. MC8. Loneliness has the same impact on mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I had to force myself to join a hiking group and a community garden. The dramatic shadows of a lonely life will consume you if you don't fight for connection. Your heart needs a reason to beat, and purpose is the most powerful cardiovascular supplement on the planet. If you don't have a reason to get out of bed, your body will eventually decide to stay there. The modern medical system is a marvel, but it has a seductive side effect. It makes us believe we can out-medicate a poor lifestyle. I looked at my nightstand at age 65 and saw a growing collection of orange plastic bottles. One for blood pressure, one for cholesterol, one for sleep. I felt like I was being managed rather than cured. A pill can keep you alive, but it cannot make you live. I realized that every medication I took was a response to a system I had neglected. By treating the symptoms of my aging rather than the root cause, my sedentary habits and poor fuel, I was just painting over the rust on a sinking ship. I had to ask myself, do I want to spend my 80s managing a chemical cocktail, or do I want to do the hard work now to earn my way off those prescriptions? What I discovered about the body's ability to reverse chronic conditions with simple, high-intensity shifts was something my doctors never had time to explain in a 15-minute appointment. There is a specific psychological wall you hit when you realize the hill you used to walk up now feels like a mountain. Most people, when they feel that strain, decide it's time to stop climbing. They take the flatter path. But the moment you stop seeking the incline is the moment your heart begins to shrink, literally. Your cardiovascular system is a use-demand system. If you don't demand that your heart pump at a high rate, it loses its stroke volume. It becomes an inefficient pump. At 70, I decided I wasn't going to let the mountains get bigger. I was going to make my heart stronger. I started with interval walking, bursts of speed followed by recovery. It was uncomfortable. It was humbling. But it sent a signal to my biology that the expedition wasn't over. You have to be the hiker who looks at the peak and says, "Not today, old age. I'm still coming for you." We often think of our legacy as the money we leave behind or the stories our children tell. But at 80, I realize my truest legacy is my physical presence. If I am too frail to attend a wedding or too tired to sit on the floor and play with blocks, my legacy is diminished. I am a ghost in my own family's lives. I began to view my strength training as a gift to my grandchildren. I wasn't lifting weights for my ego. I was lifting them so I could be the grandfather who can still pick up a toddler without throwing out his back. Your health is the yarn that knits the generations together. When that yarn becomes thin and brittle, the fabric of the family starts to tear. You owe it to the people who love you to stay as heavy-duty as possible for as long as possible. Walking into a doctor's office in your 70s feels different than it did in your 30s. There is a sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I want you to look past the stethoscope and the white coat. Look at the data. My doctor once told me that my markers were good for my age. I hated that phrase. For my age is a polite way of saying you're failing, but so is everyone else. I didn't want to be normal for an 80-year-old. I wanted to be optimal for a human being. We have to stop accepting the standard decline as our personal destiny. Comparison is the thief of joy, but average is the thief of potential. If you accept the average health of a modern senior, you are accepting a life of limited mobility and cognitive fog. Demand more from your data and demand more from your daily routine. The strength of your hand is a direct window into the health of your heart and brain. Science has shown that grip strength is one of the single best predictors of all-cause mortality. If you can't open a jar, it's not just a hand problem. It's a systemic vitality problem. I remember the day I couldn't open a jar of pickles for my wife. It was a humiliating click of the door locking behind me. I realized I was losing my grip on life itself. I started carrying heavy grocery bags, hanging from pull-up bars, and using grip trainers. Within 6 months, I wasn't just opening jars. I felt more connected to my own body. There is something primal about having a strong grip. It tells your nervous system that you are still a hunter, still a doer, and still very much alive. Don't let your hands become soft. They are your primary tools for interacting with the world. We are all standing on a bridge between the person we were and the person we will become. In your 60s, that bridge feels stable. In your 80s, it can feel like a tightrope. The difference between a bridge and a tightrope is core stability. Not the six-pack muscles we see in magazines, but the deep, internal wrappers of your spine and pelvis. If those muscles go soft, your bridge starts to sway. I spent years doing crunches thinking I was working my core, but I was actually just straining my neck. I had to learn the art of the plank and the carry. These movements stabilize the bridge. They ensure that when the wind of age blows, you don't topple over. Stability is the foundation upon which mobility is built. You cannot move through the world with confidence if your center is made of sand. Your heart is not just a pump. It is a sophisticated engine of heart rate variability, or HRV. When we are young, our heart rate is bouncy. It responds to stress and then recovers instantly. As we age and get comfortable, our heart rhythm becomes rigid. It beats like a metronome. A metronome heart is a dying heart. At 75, I started using a heart rate monitor to ensure I was hitting those high notes during my walks. I wanted to teach my heart how to be elastic again. The secret to longevity isn't a slow heart rate. It's a heart that knows how to go fast and then come back to rest. I call it vagal tone. It is the difference between a rusted gear and a well-oiled machine. If you don't occasionally redline your engine, the pistons will seize. I remember watching my friends start to lose their thread in conversation. They would repeat stories or struggle for names. We call it senior moments, but it's actually the ghosting of the brain. Your brain is a social organ. It thrives on the dance of complex interaction. When we retire and stay home, the ballroom goes dark. I forced myself to join a local theater group, not because I wanted to act, but because I had to memorize lines and interact with people 30 years younger than me. The mind is like a fire. It must be fed to stay lit. That mental exertion was the ghost of my younger self coming back to life. You have to keep dancing, even if the music feels faster than it used to. The moment you stop engaging with the new and the difficult, the lights in the ballroom start to flicker out. Imagine a clear glass of water. That is your body in your youth. Now imagine a single drop of red ink. That is inflammaging. It is the low-grade, systemic inflammation that comes with age. It doesn't hurt like a broken bone. It stains everything. It makes your brain slower, your joints stiffer, and your arteries harder. I spent my 60s drinking diet sodas and eating low-fat crackers, thinking I was being healthy. I was actually pouring ink into my system. When I switched to a whole food approach, high fats, high fiber, zero processed sugar, the ink started to clear. My joint pain wasn't arthritis. It was a food allergy to my own lifestyle. You have to be the guardian of your internal water. If you let the ink spread, no medicine can ever truly wash it clean. Your body is a city that is constantly being rebuilt. Every cell has a lifespan, and every cell is replaced. But as we get older, the construction crews get lazy. They start using cheap materials. They leave the trash in the streets. This is what we call senescent cells, zombie cells that don't die, but don't work either. They just sit there, secreting trash into your system. To fire these lazy workers, you need autophagy. This is the body's natural cleaning system, and it only turns on when you are hungry or stressed by exercise. True health is found in the moments between the meals. By practicing intermittent fasting at 72, I gave my body the cleanup time it desperately needed. I felt like the city was finally being renovated. The organic city of your body can be rebuilt, but you have to stop the constant delivery of cheap supplies. There is a profound connection between the fine motor skills of your hands and the density of your gray matter. When I began wood carving at 74, I wasn't just making spoons, I was rewiring my motor cortex. In our 60-plus years, we tend to outsource our dexterity. We buy pre-cut vegetables, we use voice-to-text, and we stop writing by hand. This is a massive mistake. Your brain views your hands as its most important sensory probes. When you stop using them for complex, delicate tasks, the brain regions dedicated to those hands begin to atrophy. I found that the more I worked with my hands, the sharper my memory became. To keep the mind sharp, keep the fingers busy. Whether it's gardening, knitting, or painting, you must maintain the artisan within you. Your brain will thank you by staying online for another decade. I recently found a book in my library titled The Architecture of Time. It reminded me that we don't run out of time, we lose the structure of it. When you retire, the scaffolding of your day, the commute, the deadlines, the meetings, disappears. Without that scaffolding, many seniors collapse into a formless existence. I've seen men my age spend 6 hours a day watching news cycles that only increase their cortisol. I had to build a new architecture. My day now has non-negotiables: the 7 a.m. walk, the 1 p.m. protein-heavy meal, and the 4 p.m. hard skill practice. Structure is the enemy of decay. When you give your body a rhythm, it responds with a steady pulse of energy. Don't let your days melt into one another. Build a schedule that treats your health like a full-time job, because, at 80, it is. Walking through the final decades of life can feel like traversing a field of needles. Every step carries the risk of a flare-up or a tweak. But the secret I learned is that the more you avoid the needles, the more sensitive you become to them. This is pain sensitization. I used to protect my bad knee by limping and avoiding stairs. All I did was make the other knee bad and my hips worse. I had to learn to walk straight through the field. By strengthening the muscles around the pain, the needles began to feel like grass again. Movement is the lotion for the joints. You cannot protect yourself into health. You have to strengthen yourself through the discomfort. The needle field of age only hurts if you are too soft to walk on it. When the fog of age gets thick, you need a lighthouse. For me, that lighthouse was a simple realization: I am not done contributing. I see so many seniors who feel like they are yesterday's news. They stop mentoring, they stop volunteering, and they stop dreaming. This social death precedes physical death by years. Your biology listens to your will to live. If you have no beacon to move toward, your engine room will stop producing energy. I started a legacy project, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and suddenly, my chronic fatigue vanished. My body found a reason to keep the lights on. You need a why that is bigger than your aches. Find someone who needs your 80 years of wisdom, and I promise you, your body will find the strength to deliver it. Look closely at the iris of a human eye. It looks like a nebula, a galaxy of infinite complexity. That is what you are. You are not a collection of ailments or a set of statistics. You are a biological miracle that has survived 8 decades on a spinning rock. As we close this journey, I want you to remember that the hard truth isn't that we are dying. It's that most of us stop living long before we die. At 80, I can see the stars clearly because I refuse to let the smog of age cloud my vision. Your 60s, 70s, and 80s are not a downward slope. They are the final frontier. Do not go gentle into that good night. It is never too late to reclaim your strength, your clarity, and your fire. The Wisecast is here to give you the tools, but you must be the architect.